Welcome to the Softball Coach Rules Interpretation Meeting. My name is Lauren Prohaska, the Director of Sport Management here at the OHSAA and the Sport Administrator for the sport of softball. I look forward to another season of softball in the state of Ohio and look forward to working with each of you throughout the season. Please don't hesitate to reach out to me at any time with questions or concerns. I will be covering OHSAA administrative rules, and then later on in the presentation, Jerry Fick, our Director of Officiating Development, will cover some of the NFHS rules and rule changes. Before we begin, if you are using a Chromebook, we strongly recommend that you stop and use a different device to view this presentation. If you choose to proceed with a Chromebook, be aware that your attendance may not be recorded or the presentation may stop or freeze. All users should take a screenshot of the final slide of this presentation in case you are not automatically awarded attendance credit. There are many resources available to you on the softball page at ohsaa.org. If you have any questions, I would suggest checking here first, as many of these documents should answer your questions. The new softball manual is updated and posted, as well as the softball regulations and tournament regulations. Coach memos are emailed directly to you, but are then also posted on the softball page if you happen to miss any of them. A new document is up on bat information, and you can also find the uniform regulations here, and the tournament draws and brackets will be posted on this page once they are completed. The rules meeting remains a requirement for all head varsity coaches to complete. A change this year is that your attendance will be reflected immediately in your MyOSHA profile as soon as you complete this meeting. So make sure you go and check your attendance as soon as you are finished. And if you don't see your attendance credit, please email me so we can get that fixed. All coaches, whether paid or volunteer, are required by Ohio law to obtain a pupil activity coaching permit. To obtain this permit, you must hold a current and valid CPR card, complete an approved sports first aid course, as well as submit a background check and complete a fundamentals of coaching course and an approved concussion course. You must also complete the sudden cardiac arrest education. If you have any questions, please see your athletic director. They do know this law well and can help you obtain the permit. Concussions have been at the forefront of injury prevention the past few years and deservedly should be addressed. Coaches and officials continue to have the authority to remove players for exhibiting the signs or symptoms of concussions. All required first aid training helps coaches with recognizing these symptoms. Any player that is removed from a practice or contest cannot return to participate on the same day as being removed. Please pay attention to your athletes and concussion symptoms. You may begin practicing with your team on February 24th. Prior to that first practice date, you can continue to do your weightlifting and conditioning. You can hold open gyms or open fields, as well as conduct individual instruction and coach your non-interscholastic teams. Please remember that you cannot make anything mandatory prior to that February 24th date. If you have any questions on any of the items I mentioned above that you're allowed to do prior to practice, please see memo number 1 on the softball page as it outlines exactly what you can and can't do for each of those items. Let's take a closer look at the individual skill instruction regulation. This regulation was put in place to allow you as school coaches to provide the same type of instruction outside the season that private instructors are permitted. So let's take a look at what you're permitted to do. You are allowed to instruct 4 individuals only in all combined facilities. That means you as the head coach can't be in the main gym with 4 players while you have your assistant coach in an aux gym with 4 additional players and another coach outside with 4 players. It's 4 players total in all combined facilities. During the instruction, it can only be individual skills that are taught, such as hitting, fielding, or pitching techniques. The things you can't do are team drills with more than 4 individuals present, or like I mentioned earlier, having different coaches working with different individuals in separate gyms. As mentioned earlier, practice can begin on February 24th. We don't require you to hold a certain number of days for tryouts, so that's totally up to you on how you want to do your tryouts. We don't limit you to a certain number of hours per day. That would be a school rule if that is in place. And we do not limit the number of players you can keep on your roster, so that is also up to you. The only time that roster number is limited is during tournament time. You are permitted 4 scrimmages or 3 scrimmages and 1 preview. Looking ahead to your first game, that can be played on March 28th. You are permitted a total of 27 games, with no more than 2 games in a day, except for the one-time exception for a triple header on a non-school day. We will cover the game ending procedures a little bit later in this presentation. If you have any transfer students on your softball team, please consult with your athletic director first. He or she has probably already spoken to our office and has started any appropriate paperwork. However, if they do not meet a transfer exception, they will sit out the second half of the season and the OHSAA tournament. However, new this year, any transfer student who does not meet an exception becomes ineligible at game 15. Last year, they became ineligible at game 14, meaning they do get to play 1 extra game this year. It is imperative that you alert your athletic director or principal as soon as you realize you might have a transfer student on your team. If you are planning to travel out of state with your team, please pay special attention to this bylaw and this slide. You are permitted to scrimmage out of state. However, if you do so, it must be considered a scrimmage for your opponent as well. So it could not be a scrimmage for you while your opponent counts it as a game. I would suggest getting this in writing from your opponent if you're planning to do this, so that you have that proof in case it would ever come back to you. You are not permitted to travel out of state just to practice. All games must be played by official NFHS rules, and all games must have licensed officials from that state. If you are traveling to a contiguous state, you are permitted to do that in an unlimited number of times. You are permitted to miss school time, and you are permitted to practice out of state while you're there to scrimmage or play a game. If you're traveling to a non-contiguous state, this is only permitted 1 time per season, and you are not permitted to miss any school time for travel or competition. You are permitted to practice out of state while you're there to play a scrimmage or a game. This is important that violation of any of these rules results in ineligibility for the OHSAA tournament, so please keep this in mind as you make your travel plans. The regular season does not start until March 28th, so that is the first day you can play a game. If you're traveling out of state prior to that, it has to be a scrimmage, and it must be a scrimmage for your opponent as well. Something that has grown in importance over the past few years that needs attention are game contracts. Here are the things to consider when you agree to play an opponent. First, all games are agreed upon by a formal written contract. League schedules are considered binding agreements as well. You cannot drop an opponent mid-season just because you don't want to play them, nor can you drop an opponent to make a league game up instead. But, and I know this is done regularly, that if both teams agree to not play, you can of course do that, but the opponent does have to agree. You also agree to make a game up that is suspended or canceled, again pending whether both teams agree not to do so. Entering into a contract is also an agreement to the umpires hired for the contest and the decisions made by those umpires. I mention this in detail as more and more contract disputes are coming into our office for resolution. When a player is ejected from a contest, they are to remain supervised in the bench area. They are ineligible for all play remaining that day, as well as ineligible for the next 2 contests at the level of the ejection. They are permitted to sit on the team bench as well as travel with the team and be in the locker room. However, they cannot wear any team uniform or team warm-up, and they cannot participate in any warm-up. If a coach is ejected, they must leave the facility. They can go to the locker room or team bus or leave the premises. However, they are not permitted to go up to the spectator area. They're ineligible for that day as well as the next 2 contests. They may not travel or sit with the team, and they are required to pay a $100 fine and complete an NFHS course. There are no appeals on ejections. Even when officials do not notify the school, the ejection protocol must still be enforced. Rating and voting is an important part of the tournament assignment process for officials. Currently, you have the opportunity to rate officials through your OHSAA account, but it is not mandatory this year. We are working on a new API to make the system more efficient, which is why rating is not required this season. Your athletic director is still required to vote. Just a quick reminder, as media coverage and social media continue to put more and more emphasis on high school sports, please think first before lashing out at an umpire's poor call. OHSAA regulations do prohibit negative comments and any public criticism of officials in the media. Please also remind your players of this and that it does include social media. The lightning and inclement weather policy is a national federation policy for all sports. Anytime you hear thunder or see lightning, you must stop play immediately and go on a 30-minute wait. However, the NFHS has added a new note this year to that policy, which reads, "At night, under certain atmospheric conditions, lightning flashes may be seen from distant storms. In these cases, it may be safe to continue an event. If no thunder can be heard and the flashes are low on the horizon, the storm may not pose a threat. Independently verified lightning detection information would help eliminate any uncertainty." So with this new note, if lightning is seen, you would still stop the contest immediately. You would then get together the game administration, coaches, and umpires, and you can then determine if it is safe to continue. Please remember, this is only applicable at night. If you hear thunder, you are on an immediate 30-minute delay, so there is no exception when you hear thunder. Please just remember that safety comes first, so if you see lightning, make sure you stop the contest first before you assess if it's safe to continue. Also remember, a game that is suspended and never finished is not counted, and you may schedule a game to replace that. A couple other important reminders on this policy. All personnel, athletes, and spectators shall evacuate to available safe structures or shelters whenever there is inclement weather in the area. Also, anytime there is lightning or thunder and you start the 30-minute clock, anytime there is subsequent lightning strike or sound of thunder in the area, then you must reset that 30-minute clock and you would start a new 30-minute count from that last sound of thunder or sight of lightning. So make sure you're starting a new clock anytime you spot or hear inclement weather. Continuing with important reminders of OHSAA regulations, this was adopted by member schools, and all athletic events require administrative oversight from the host school. Given that, sometimes that oversight might be from you as the coach if no administrator is present. So just a word of caution, since it is required, it means you must ensure the safety of the umpires before, during, and after the game. You have to be able to deal with unruly fans, as well as coordinate crisis management and weather issues. Talk with your AD prior to the game if you're not sure who has administrative oversight that day. We're now going to get into completed and suspended game explanations. We'll first start with the completed game. So a game is considered complete if, number one, both coaches mutually agree to end the game early, and this happens most often when one team has a considerable lead and both schools simply agree to end the game. The score would stand and the game is over. Number two, anytime a team has a 10-run lead and the team behind in the score has completed its turn at bat in the 5th inning, the game would be completed. Number three, when the game has gone beyond the 5th inning and the game is called for any reason such as weather or darkness, it is a complete game and you are not permitted to resume that game unless it fits into one of the following exceptions of a suspended game. Now let's take a look at the exceptions that take place after the 5th inning that would render a game suspended. Number 1, if a game is called due to weather or darkness and that game is tied, it would be considered a suspended game because no game is permitted to end in a tie. Number 2, if the visiting team has scored 1 or more runs to tie or take the lead, and the home team has not had the opportunity to complete its full turn at bat in the bottom half of the inning to take the lead, it would be considered a suspended game. If a suspended game is not completed, it simply goes down as a no contest, and you can schedule another game in its place. Another reminder that when a suspended game is completed or resumed, it shall be continued from the point of suspension, with batting orders and lineups the same. However, you can make substitutions. Any player that may have been suspended from the original contest would have to be suspended and unable to play in the resumed game. Let's move on to some regulations affecting your players. Each player may play on 32 dates. That means a doubleheader would only count as one date of their 32. This forces coaches to track this carefully because exceeding the 32 dates results in that player being ineligible. And if you use an ineligible player, that would result in a forfeiture. The main purpose of this was to help teams with limited numbers keep JV teams, as well as give some younger players opportunities in varsity games. Another regulation for your players is the non-interscholastic rule. Please make sure to remind your players many times throughout the season that they are not permitted to work out with any non-school softball team. That means they can't try out or practice with their travel team. They cannot attend any college ID camp or any professional camp. Anything that's not school related, please remind them that that is not permitted during the season. Should they participate in non-interscholastic softball, that would render them ineligible. And once again, once an ineligible player plays for you, then you would have to forfeit those games. So please keep reminding your players of that. Now let's take a look at player regulations outside the season. There is a limit of 4 players that played together on the same school team permitted on any non-interscholastic team. The only time this is not in effect is from the Friday prior to Memorial Day weekend through July 31st. Any senior who has finished their school season would not count towards that 4-player limitation, and any student that did not play for the softball team or their school team in the previous season, they would also not count towards that 4-player limitation. Also remember, grades 7th and 8th are separate from grades 9 through 12. So you could have 4 7th and 8th graders play with 4 players from your 9th through 12th grade teams. A note on indoor softball, there is no limit on the number of players from the same school team, but it must be played indoors between November 1st and February 1st. Remember, if there are more than 4 players from the same school team, that team cannot be coached by a school coach. Here are the coaching regulations outside the season. You are permitted to coach players from your school team on non-interscholastic teams. However, you are limited to the 4 players from your school team. The only time you are not permitted to coach is during the no contact period, which runs during the month of August. A reminder that the 10-day rule does permit you to coach as many players from your school team as you want for a maximum of 10 days from June 1st to July 31st. Looking ahead to the tournament representation can be found in the tournament regulations that are posted on the softball page. The divisional breakdowns are also posted on the OHSAA website. The tournament draw will be conducted and posted in probably mid to late February. Each district athletic board sets up and conducts all sectional and district tournaments. The OHSAA office conducts all regional and state tournaments. I will continue to communicate directly with each of you with periodic memos sent directly to your email inbox. If it's not going to the email that you want it to go to, or if it's not going to the correct person, please speak with your athletic director. The email addresses we use are pulled directly from the school's account. So whatever email they have listed for you in the school account is the one we use to send the memos to. If you have any questions or topics you'd like to see covered in these memos, please reach out to me and I will make sure those are put into one of the upcoming memos. If you happen to miss one of these, they are also posted on the softball page for you to access. Jerry Fick, our Director of Officiating Development, will now cover some of the NFHS rule changes and points of emphasis.
Again this year, coaches are responsible for verifying that all players are legally and properly equipped prior to the start of each game. Coaches need to know the condition of all equipment in the dugout and remove what's not legal. Umpires don't inspect equipment any longer. However, we do expect you to remain vigilant in identifying violations and penalizing as necessary. Remember, items such as an illegal bat or a helmet that is defective are not appeal plays. If you see these, you're responsible for taking care of them right away. As mentioned, the responsibility for pregame equipment checks is now with the coach. Some of the items that need to be checked include bats, catcher's gear, batter runner helmets, and make sure there is no jewelry. There are penalties for violations, and these must be enforced by umpires when the violations are discovered. Let's talk a little bit about bat certification marks, and we'll talk about these more later. There are now 3 legal bat certification marks. All are from ASA USA Softball. The 2000 certification mark, the 2004 certification mark, and this year's new USA Softball certified mark. Let's say that a coach brings a bat to an umpire that has another organization's marking. The coach claims that since it's been approved by another organization, it's acceptable for high school play. The ruling in this situation is the bat is not approved and may not be used. All bats, and we will talk about this later in the meeting as well, all bats must bear one of these certification marks. In addition to bearing one of the 3 certification marks, a bat may not, and I repeat, not appear on the USA Softball non-approved bat list. This bat list can be printed from the USA Softball website, and umpires should carry the list with them. Remember that an altered bat or a non-approved bat results in the ejection of both the player using the bat and the head coach. There is no warning. This is covered in Rule 742. We'll talk extensively about bats later on, as this is a major point of emphasis for us this year. Each state's high school association has the opportunity to make certain rules adoptions based on choices offered by the National Federation. Let's talk about our OHSAA adoptions. First, let's talk about what's not an adoption. Remember that we have no pitching limitation, number of innings, or number of pitches in softball. This applies to baseball only. Each year there's some questions on this, so we'll review it once again. Some of the rules we do follow. We don't have the tiebreaker. It's not used in OHSAA. That means that we play the extra innings the same as we played the first 7 innings, not putting a runner on second base. Remember that we don't allow protests in Ohio, and as such it's important that you have your rule books available to review if necessary, so that we get all those playing rule rulings correct at the site. 5-inning doubleheaders are permitted if both teams agree prior to the start of the contest. So if both teams agree, you can have 2 5-inning games in a doubleheader. You can have a 5 and a 7, a 7 and a 5, or if the teams don't agree, then you're going to end up with 2 7s. Triple headers are allowed. This is not something that really umpires have to police, but schools are allowed to play a triple header once per year, provided it's on a non-school day. Keep in mind now that doubleheaders can be played any day of the week. A word about forfeits. Remember, forfeits cannot occur when the game does not start. If a team does not show up or does not have enough players to start a game, it's no contest. The way you would have a forfeit in Ohio is if a team did not have enough players to continue the contest. That would be an example of a forfeited game. The key there is the game has already started. Our game-ending procedures are something that we need to review each and every year. They're a little bit confusing because they differ from NFHS rules, and they also differ from regular season to tournament. Remember that in regular season, a game suspended before 5 innings is resumed from the point of interruption. A game suspended after 5 innings or 4.5 innings with the home team ahead is over. A game suspended after 4.5 innings with the visiting team ahead would be resumed from the point of interruption. Regular season games that go beyond 5 innings are complete games, with the exception of ties or when the visiting team has tied or taken the lead and the inning is not completed. For example, if in the 6th inning you start out with a 2-1 score in favor of the home team at the beginning of the top of the 6th, and the visitors score a run or two to tie or take the lead, and that inning's not completed, the game is suspended due to rain or whatever, then that game is resumed from the point of interruption. So that's an exception along with ties. Remember that in Ohio we never start games over, and we have examples of all of this and more information in our preseason guide, the White Book. So you can review that and take a look at game-ending procedures on page 17. OHSAA tournament games are played to completion. That means they're played 7 innings unless Rule 423 applies, where the teams mutually agree or consent to terminate a game early, or the 10-run rule applies. Those two situations are considered played to completion, the same as 7 innings or more if the game needs to go extra innings. Some other OHSAA comments. Remember that the 10-run rule applies after 5 innings, 4.5 for the home team. That applies to regular season and tournament play. There's no exception. That applies to all games, all levels. A comment on pitching distance. We review this every year, primarily because we want to talk about the fact that junior high and middle school is only 40 feet as opposed to 43 feet for grades 9 through 12. We have a number of questions on this each year, so remember, in junior high and middle school, the pitching distance is 40 feet. There are no exceptions to this. The double first base is mandatory again in Ohio. This has been since 2017, and this applies to all games, all levels. Another relatively new OHSAA adoption has to do with uniform styles in case of inclement weather. This is Federation Rule 321. The rules require that all uniforms be of the same color and style, and state associations can, and in Ohio we do, permit exceptions for religious reasons. Another authorized exception applies in Ohio. A player may also participate while wearing a different style uniform because of inclement weather. It could include a jacket, coat, sweatshirt, sweatpants, or similar items. In these cases, no written authorization is needed. They simply can make the adjustment based on the weather. This next topic we're going to cover both under our adoptions and our points of emphasis because it is an important one. Remember that players are not permitted to wear jewelry. There are certain exceptions, including religious and medical alert items, which are permitted. Also, in Ohio, we permit daith ear piercings, which are a treatment used by some physicians for migraine headaches. If a student athlete has a daith ear piercing, they can get a note from their doctor showing the necessity and submit that through their school to the OHSAA. The OHSAA will determine if a waiver will be issued, and the waiver should be available at the game and shown to the umpire. If there's no waiver, the item cannot be worn or else the player cannot play. Please keep in mind that violations of the jewelry rule, which we will discuss once again later on, are penalized as illegal equipment, a team warning. The next offender and the head coach shall be restricted to the dugout or bench for the remainder of the game. And obviously it's got to be made legal before the player can participate. Another topic that we need to cover is the issue of sporting conduct and bench restrictions. We'd like you to use bench restrictions when appropriate. An example would be a use of an electronic device on the field. It's very important that umpires review and study Rule 3-6, and this is a great topic for a local meeting. Rule 3-6 covers what I call the multitude of sins, or the 20 commandments, all the different things that can happen during the course of a game that results in ejection, bench restriction, or some other type of penalty or warning. The umpire needs to know what penalty applies to which violation and ensure that the proper penalty is assessed accordingly. Remember that in softball, both coaches and players can be restricted to the bench. Our next topic is our OHSAA points of emphasis for this year. There's 4. One is bats, and we've talked about bats already, and we're going to talk about those more as a National Federation point of emphasis. So I'm really going to let that first item slide down into the National Federation section. It's really just so important that it's one of our points of emphasis. It's a National Federation point of emphasis, and it's a problem we had last year in many cases. So it's very important. We're going to talk about it later and make sure that you're in good shape as far as understanding the definitions and penalties involved in the various types of bats that might be an issue. We'll also talk about noisemakers, jewelry, and game management. Obviously, noise-making devices are not permitted in the dugout. That includes musical instruments, horns, bells, whistles, whatever. It's also not permitted to bang items such as ball buckets or banging bats on dugouts or fences. These situations can quite often be handled quickly with a warning, but repeated violations need a restriction to the bench or ejection of either the coach, the offender, or both. Jewelry. We talked about it earlier, and it is a point of emphasis for us. Remember, it's covered in Rule 3.2.12, and there's numerous examples of what jewelry it consists of, but remember, it doesn't need to be metal. It can be the rubber bracelets, the cloth or string necklaces, other decorative items that are all illegal. The penalty for violations include a team warning on the first offense, and of course in addition to removing the item, with subsequent offenses resulting in a bench restriction to that subsequent offender and the head coach. Too often umpires seem to want to take the easy way out and ignore jewelry situations or other safety rules or policies. This is dangerous for you, the student athlete, the coach, everyone, and it's something that we really need to do better on. Remember that religious medals can be worn, taped under the uniform. Medical alert medals can be worn, taped, visible. And as I mentioned earlier, daith ear piercings are permitted, but they must have the waiver from the OHSAA with them and show it to you. No waiver, present at the game, then either the date ear piercing cannot be worn or else the student athlete cannot play in the game. When we talk about playing federation rules, we talk about the National Federation. It's located in Indianapolis and is the source for rules in all high school sports. The National Federation consists of the 50 state associations plus the District of Columbia. It's divided into 8 sections, and each of the 8 sections are represented on the Rules Committee in various sports. I'm currently the Section 2 representative for the Softball Committee. If you have ideas concerning potential rules changes for the game, please submit them to me in writing, preferably by email. The Rules Committee meets each year and discusses potential changes, and then that rules writing process continues with a review by the National Federation Rules Review Committee and the Board of Directors. The Federation writes playing rules for 17 sports and publishes 4 million pieces of material annually. That includes your rule books and other guides. The rules are available in electronic format. The e-book can be accessed from iTunes or Amazon. The cost is $6.99 each. Also, there's a rules app available. You can go to nfhs.org for more information. Keep in mind that the e-book and the app are both searchable and give you that benefit as well. Well, on the topic of publications, there are some changes to the 2020 Rules Book and Umpire Manual. First, the Rule Book, Rule 243 on page 18. The last word in the first sentence should be changed from bat to ball. And Rule 611, Play Pick 6, which is found on page 50, the pivot foot in this particular case is in contact with the pitcher's plate, and therefore this is legal. The indication in the rule book is that the pivot foot is not in contact with the plate. However, as you can see, it is, and that makes this legal. Let's talk the 2020 rules changes. Our first change has to do with damaged bats. A damaged bat is defined as one that was once legal but is now broken, cracked, dented, whatever. It's removed from the game without penalty. We're going to go into a lot more detail about bats in our points of emphasis section, but at this point we need you to understand the definition and that the bat is removed from the game without penalty. The next change has to do with pitching. And the pitcher's pivot foot must now be in contact with the pitcher's plate versus the previous rule, which required it to be on top of the pitcher's plate. The slide on the left, slide A, shows the foot on top of the pitcher's plate. This is still just fine. The slide on the right shows the foot touching the pitcher's plate. This is also fine now. So the change is that the foot need no longer be on top of the plate, simply in contact with the plate. There are a number of diagrams in the rule book, page 50, figure 6.1, that show both legal and illegal placement of the feet. Please note that diagram number 6 on page 50 is the one that we indicated earlier in the presentation is legal, as there was a printing error on that diagram. This particular slide also shows a number of situations that help us understand what is illegal and legal. Keep in mind that the pivot foot, as well as the non-pivot foot, must be entirely or partially within the 24-inch length of the pitching plate. Therefore, although the pivot foot in the first diagram, the one on the left, is in contact with the pitcher's plate, it is not within the 24-inch length of the pitcher's plate. that particular starting position would be illegal. The remaining starting positions show the foot within contact with the pitcher's plate and also within the 24-inch width of the pitching plate. Therefore, the three diagrams on the right are all legal. Whether both feet are in contact with the plate or only the pivot foot is in contact with the plate, the pitcher still must take or simulate taking a signal from the catcher while on the rubber. This is an important item and it probably should be a point of emphasis just about every year. We cannot allow pitchers to simply walk onto the rubber and pitch without simulating taking a signal or taking a signal on the pitcher's plate. There has to be the pause to do that. The actual signal can be taken while on the pitcher's plate or standing behind the pitcher's plate or elsewhere. It can be taken from anyone. It can be a verbal call obtained from looking at a wristband. However, the pitcher must then take a position on the pitcher's plate with the hands separated and simulate taking a signal from the catcher. This is a safety issue and a fairness issue for the batter. The failure to make this pause and simulate or take a signal from on the rubber with the hands together is an illegal pitch. This is an important item that we need to work on this year. The next change is what I would really call a cleanup in how a run scores. And we're going to take a look in the next slide at how this works. A fly ball is caught for the second out. Both runners tag, with the runner on third leaving early and scoring. The runner on second leaves legally and advances to third base. There's then an overthrow and that runner is awarded home plate. The defense then appeals that the runner on third left early. In this play, no runs would score because the following runner cannot score when the preceding runner is called out for the third out of an inning on appeal. We also have a few editorial changes for this year. First, we have some new language clarifying that media areas must be in dead ball territory. This was a rules change last year and it's been clarified a bit. This illustration actually shows very well some potential locations for media areas. Note that they're all in dead ball territory. The reason for this change is obvious. There's a number of reasons for it, and we discussed it extensively last year. The key thing to know is no media areas in live ball territory. As we indicated earlier, we have a new USA softball certification mark that's been added for bats. We'll talk about that in our points of emphasis in just a moment. You'll see this mark in the 2020 season and beyond. This is another cleanup item. Language has been added to clarify that when the catcher stops a wild pitch or pass ball with detached equipment, the batter is not awarded a base. Only the batter runner would be awarded a base. Let's cover the 2020 points of emphasis. First, we had a good bit of confusion last year concerning bats. Some of you were involved in some of this confusion, so we're going to try to make it simpler this year. Number one, there are now 3 certification marks that must appear on a bat. These are shown here, and you'll see where they're generally found, although sometimes they're found on the taper. So what's new for this year is that a damaged bat is now removed from the game without penalty. This includes a bat with cracks, dents, whatever. An illegal bat is a bat that doesn't meet the specifications of the bat rule. Altered bats and non-approved bats are types of illegal bats. There's other types as well. A batter who enters the box with an illegal bat is out. The ball's dead, and if the ball was hit, runners advance. They have to return to the base occupied at the time of the pitch. If a runner is retired on the play, that out stands rather than having that runner return. An altered bat is one that was once legal but has been structurally changed. A non-approved bat is one that does not meet the USA softball specifications. It either doesn't have the USA softball approval marks, one of the three marks, or it's on the non-approved bat list that we mentioned earlier. Keep in mind that in order to be an approved bat, a bat must have both the certification mark and not be on the non-approved list. The use of a altered or non-approved bat carries the same penalty as an illegal bat, plus the fact that both the batter and the head coach are ejected. This means the umpire has to complete the online report so that the school administration can enforce the additional penalties that apply to both of these people because the ejections occurred. For this year, a new definition has been added for a damaged bat. This item is defined as a bat that was once legal but is now broken, cracked, dented, rattled, or has sharp edges that could cut the ball. Damaged bats are considered illegal and when discovered are immediately removed from the game without penalty. In order for a bat to be damaged, it must originally have been a legal bat. I realize this can be a little bit complicated, but keep in mind that the non-approved bat was developed because there were a relatively small number of bats that had once been approved for use, but for various reasons are no longer approved for use. This could include the manufacturer withdrawing them from the approved list or some other reason. The key thing to remember is that a bat must have one of the three certification marks and not be on the non-approved list. That is the only way that it can be a legal bat. The inspection of equipment is a head coach responsibility. This is something that needs to be done before each and every game. The Federation plans to continue to keep this as a point of emphasis each and every year, as it's very important that only equipment complying with the rules is used. The last point of emphasis relates to a rules change that was made both in a previous year and this year. Keep in mind that the pitcher may choose to take a position with the pivot foot in contact with the plate and the non-pivot foot behind the plate, or both feet may be in contact with the pitcher's plate. When we say in contact with the pitcher's plate, it's no longer required that the pivot foot be atop the pitcher's plate. Prior to the start of delivery, both feet must be on the ground within or partially within the 24-inch length of the pitcher's plate. All of this will allow for personal preference and allow pitchers to work through various levels of progression. Let's review some items that we covered last year that might need a little attention for the 2020 season. First, keep in mind that when an illegal pitch is called, the batter is awarded a ball. We are no longer awarding the runners a base. This was a change in 2019, and it's one that we can't forget for the coming season. It's important to remember if there's an illegal pitch and the batter reaches first base safely and every other runner advances at least one base, the illegal pitch is nullified. An example, bases loaded, nobody out. The pitcher throws an illegal pitch, the batter hits the ball to the outfield and all runners score. The batter is thrown out at second base. The ruling, all runners would score, the batter runner is out, there is no option, and the illegal pitch is ignored. As before, under the rules, if the batter does not reach first safely on an illegal pitch or any base runner fails to advance at least one base, the coach of the team at bat shall have the option of the result of the play or the penalty of the illegal pitch, which is a ball awarded to the batter. Here's an example. With no outs and runners on first and third, F1 delivers an illegal pitch. The batter hits into a double play as the lead runner scores. The offense may take the result of the play, 2 outs and 1 run, or have the runners return to first and third, while the batter continues at bat. Another play. With no outs and a runner on first, the pitcher throws an illegal pitch. The batter swings and misses as the runner steals second. The offense may accept the result of the play, which leaves the runner at second base and the batter with a 1-2 count, or they can have the batter return to first with the penalty of a ball being enforced and a 2-1 count on the batter. It is possible to have two rules violations on the same pitch. An illegal pitch is called and a runner is called out for leaving early on the pitch. The ruling: if the runner leaving early occurs first, the ball is dead and the illegal pitch never happened. If the illegal pitch came first, both violations are penalized, a ball on the batter, and the runner is out. All other runners remain on the same base. The NFHS Learning Center, NFHSLearn.com, includes professional development for everyone. Actually, although this slide doesn't reflect it, in the month of January, the Federation reached 10 million courses issued through this program, and that's quite a milestone. There are over 70 courses available, over 35 at no cost.
Thank you for completing the softball coach rules interpretation meeting. Please do take a screenshot of this final slide in case you are not awarded attendance credit and someone asks to see this as proof of completion. You are able to go see your attendance credit right now in your OHSAA account. If you go to the Rules Meetings tab, and then on the left-hand side, there will be a My State Meeting Attendance Credit tab to click on. And when you click on that, you should see a date and time stamp of completion. If you don't see that, please reach out to me and we will get that taken care of for you. Best of luck this season, and please don't hesitate to reach out to me if you need anything.